low out there. I don't know what happened to the countdown there, but welcome to the GamecockScoop.com podcast, the official podcast of GamecockScoop.com on Rivals. I'm Caleb, joined by Alan, and if you're watching us on Instagram, I hope you are. This is our first time trying to make the StreamYard go live on Instagram, so hopefully it's working. If you're watching us there or anywhere else, feel free to comment, and I think we'll see it, and we can kind of have a live discussion with anything that you have questions about or comments about or whatever. As always, this will be posted on whatever your favorite podcast streaming platform and YouTube is after we're done as well. Been kind of a crazy week. So it's been, I guess, 9 days since our last podcast, which we did last Wednesday. 3 more ads in the transfer portal since then. We'll start with Gilbert Edmond.
Does that count as an ad? That's more like a return.
Welcome back home.
An actual welcome home from Shane Beamer.
I saw some of the fun graphics that our Rivals folks put together, and it's not often that you see the Gamecock logo, another logo, and then back to the Gamecock logo. Obviously, Florida State in between there. Usually, it's a little bit of a less twisting path than that. But if you're South Carolina, I think you welcome them back with open arms, and it's another body in a defensive end room that, obviously has huge upside with someone like Dylan Stewart, but outside of true freshman who obviously will need to grow into his frame and grow into his style for, every down sort of role in the SEC. You have a lot of guys with upside, but and veteran presence, but not necessarily I don't know, a one-fits-all approach there. But I think Edmond fits in pretty well there, and you now have a room that you feel confident about at least shuffling quite a few bodies through.
I think that's the main thing here. I think we already know what Edmond brings from a football sense. You saw him in 2022 in this team. Helpful body, useful pass rusher. I definitely think more of that like third down, obvious passing situation type than a guy you want in there, on obvious rundowns or even just every snap in general. But it's a body. It helps for sure. I think welcome to the new era of college football, I guess, as players leaving and coming back is kind of the takeaway there.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit more about this when we talk roster management after we run through a couple more names. But with the allowance of multiple transfers, even within the course of a year or whatever, I think we'll see maybe even a little bit more of this. For those of you that didn't keep up with Edmond last year, he went to Florida State and didn't really make much of an impact, which is maybe a little surprising because he was rated pretty highly coming out of South Carolina. Kind of flashed some potential filling in for Jordan Strahan back in 2022. But it seems like didn't really build on any of those flashes last year. So we'll see if, returning back to South Carolina can get a little bit more juice of that fruit or whatever. Also, we finally, I guess since then, we've had 2 quarterbacks into the roster. One was a walk-on, but the big news, I think, is Auburn quarterback, or former Auburn quarterback, Bobby Ashford, is officially added in the portal. And yeah, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this. I think it's about the best case scenario that could have gotten, considering that the whole time we've kind of said that they weren't putting all their eggs in trying to go find a starting quarterback because they feel like Lenora Sellers can be that guy. But they obviously had a little bit of depth issues, and it seems like Ashford kind of fits the best of both worlds in the sense of he could compete for the starting role. He has some similarities to Sellers, but assuming Sellers does beat him out, he is a quality backup.
So I definitely agree with everything you just said there. I think that kind of, we talked a lot over the last, 6 weeks, 7 weeks about how it is a tough needle to thread. You've got to get someone here who can actually play if something happens to Sellers, but someone who actually is willing to come and compete. to me, the interesting thing is more, maybe you have a thought on this, like, all right, let's say this goes the way we think it's going to go. Sellers wins the job. He stays healthy, whatever. Can Robbie Ashford still help you? And beyond just being a guy you can play if Sellers gets hurt, I kind of think yes. And I think you might actually, because they're similar, because they do similar things, you might be able to use Ashford in a kind of the way they used Sellers last year. Some of those like third down packages, some of the zone read stuff, some red zone, obviously garbage time for sure if it gets to the game, gets to that point. But I kind of think you have a weapon here who can play even if Sellers does do what you think he's going to do and win the job.
Yeah, and you mentioned there's similarities. We have a full film breakdown of Ashford's game, which obviously we have a lot more college film on him than Sellers thus far. But Sellers' high school profile was elite arm strength, very mobile. Obviously, he's a huge dude. He's 6'3" and squats 1,000,000 pounds.
Yeah.
And I think Ashford actually projects pretty similarly in the sense of Ashford can make pretty much all the NFL throws. He has plenty of arm strength. It's just he's throwing at 100 miles an hour, whether you're 5 feet away from him or you're 50 yards down the field. And one of the knocks, I guess, on Sellers kind of high school was some problems with accuracy. Now, we didn't see him enough in college action last year, I think, to really make a full determination if that cleaned up or not. We think some of it has. But yeah, I mean, really just, I guess what I'm saying is very similar in the sense of big upside for both guys, big arms for both guys, and then it's just refinement from there. And I guess whichever of them feels more refined going into 2024, which doesn't even necessarily mean that's the guy for the whole season or whatever. I don't know. We have a lot to determine through spring, but whichever feels more refined going into 2024, that's who you're going to roll with.
Yeah, I think that's probably about the right way of looking at it. You would probably still have Sellers with that inside track just because of A, what he's already shown in a South Carolina uniform, and B, the way they approach the portal, the way they kind of, like we said, maneuvered around a little bit, tried to get the right guy in here, not just whoever they could at quarterback. I think that just kind of tell you what they think of Sellers, what they think Sellers can be. So I would say he's still your favorite for sure, as we're a couple months away from spring ball still, but Ashford's going to be here to compete. Like, he didn't come here to sit on the bench all year. And I think even if he doesn't win the job, he is still going to have a role in helping this team.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. And regardless, you feel much, much better about the prospect of an injury, God forbid, or something like that.
That's the main thing. Even like if Lenora Sellers' helmet pops off for a play, he's got to sit out one play. You're not going right to Dante Reno in this case anymore.
Right. And then the other ad since we last talked is Jamar Bell, who also had an Auburn connection, started his college career there, but then went to Florida Atlantic before now rejoining life in the SEC. That one came out of nowhere for me. Wasn't on my list of visitors going into the weekend or whatever, but nice ad. We were trying to figure out, is this a preferred walk-on? Is this a scholarship player? All indications are yes, he's going to be a scholarship guy. I think you're probably done with your offensive line depth chart, at least heading into the spring at this point, after adding Simpkins, Bell. There's one other I'm missing.
I'm trying to think here. Well, I think
Whatever.
For what you think of that, well, for this, I think for these purposes, you've got a guy who's played a lot of football. I mean, 2 straight years, every game starter for Florida Atlantic. I know it's lower level. We've had this conversation a lot on the podcast. It's just a guy who has played a lot of football. Parks of the other lineman you're thinking of, by the way, the Oklahoma kid. So yeah, you're at what? I mean, what are you at now, line-wise? With your 3 coming in, your 3 in the portal, you've got Trey Jones, Ja'Kai Moore, Vershawn Lee, Tyshawn Wanamaker, and Sidney Fugar back. That's 11 right there. Plus Babalade, obviously. Bob,
13 guys.
Case and Henry,
Anderson,
14. Yeah, I mean, that's what we just named 15 right there. So I think you feel a lot better about your offensive line depth situation. That's going to be one of the things to watch in the spring, I think, is trying to figure out not how it's going to shake out completely between now and September, but how that starts to look.
Yeah, no, I agree. And we kind of were mentioning this, but that now puts you at 89 scholarship players. heading into the spring. Obviously, that number has to get down to 85 by August or so. But as people around have told you for years, really, when people oversign recruiting classes and now in the portal, the numbers always work out. Something will change between now and probably summer camp. We just mentioned the two-time movement rule. It honestly wouldn't even surprise me if some of the guys that signed in this portal period are back in the portal by spring, just depending on how spring practice goes and how the depth chart starts to shake out. It's a good problem to have at the moment, where you can kind of see where the chips fall in live action in the spring, and then maybe encourage some guys to seek more playing time opportunities elsewhere if it seems like they're not projecting to land on a starting South Carolina roster.
Yeah, we don't have a date yet for the spring game, but I think based on some indicators, it's going to be April 20th. That's a Saturday, obviously, and then the portal's open until April 30th, so I have a week and a half there after the end of spring ball for players to get back in the portal.
Yeah, and I guess if we're just like thinking about the class in general, which I'm asking this off the top of our head, we don't have the full thing written out in front of us right now, but I guess who are a couple of your biggest ads from this period? Because we think it's pretty much over, at least at this point. And then I guess if some shuffling does happen in the spring, what would you still like to see another ad potentially or two in the spring?
It's a cop-out answer, but I think the biggest ad has got to be Rocket, right? That's just it's an all SEC running back. It changes the way you look at the offense, changes how you feel about the running back room. In the interest of offering a different answer than just Rocket, because I think that would probably be most fans' answers. I'm going to say maybe Kennard from Georgia Tech. Kyle Kennard, the defensive end, add some pass rush, some Power 5 experience there. Oh, was? Okay, well.
Yeah, that's perfect.
That's kind of those would be the two I would say, but and Ashford too, just from a body's perspective. We've talked about how much you needed a quarterback.
Yeah, I think that's just important from like hedging perspective as well. If Norris goes down, you're not necessarily done with your season in the same way that you would have been. No offense to Dante, I think he has potential to be very good. I just think it's tough for a true freshman to come in and make an impact in that way. I guess if I have an honorable mention, the guys we just mentioned, although I think Kennard's probably my number one. Edmund, similarly, nice to add too, but Gage Larvadane, I think, is probably my favorite wide receiver ad. But that also brings to the next point. I still think if you could get a true alpha sort of guy to show up in the spring, you would find a way to make room for him. I don't know if that's necessarily an option, and I think your wide receiver room is okay in the sense of there's a lot of depth, a lot of veteran proven depth at this point, and a lot of guys that you can maybe piece it together with like a 300-yard season, a 400-yard season, and if you know 4 or 5 of those guys, then fine, your passing game is going to be all right. I just don't know that you're going to have anyone pushing 1,000 like you had this past year.
I would say too, if you're talking about what could you add, I think a veteran corner would go a long way. Just right now, I think you feel okay about your room. You've got Odie Fortune, Judge Collier, Emery Floyd, Vakari Swain, Zabari Sandy, and I guess Jalewis Sullivan coming in as a true freshman.
And they added the preferred walk-on Pitt too.
Yep. I still think if you can get a guy with some experience in there, someone who can either even just help your young corners, but also rotate in and take some snaps. You talk about positions, right, where like an injury really hurts you. That's why we were on quarterback so much, obviously. I think you feel better at wide receiver now that if you lose one from that group, it's not going to necessarily sink you the way it would have if Leggett went down last year. Line depth, talked about that, both sides. If you lost an OD Fortune or a Judge Collier next year, and I think your cornerback room does start to actually look kind of thin. And if you had a domino effect there, like you had maybe an O-line last year, you could probably do it with another corner who's played some college football.
Yeah. Granted, we have seen DB in particular. They've hit on a lot of freshmen that can make an immediate impact. I think Jalewis Solomon is one of those guys that could make an immediate impact. But I don't disagree that it wouldn't be a bad thing to have a little more veteran presence there. Speaking of, I guess, coaching and a couple more football notes, since we last spoke, South Carolina picked up a running back coach, which will be made official here in a couple of hours. That's Marquell Blackwell. We'll learn a little bit more about his contract after the Board of Trustees meeting, in like 2 hours?
No, like half an hour.
Yeah. But what is your takeaway, I guess, from that ad? Everything I've heard has been pretty positive. And again, this is kind of something we said with the Coley thing. Proven recruiter with some maybe new areas for South Carolina to kind of break into that they haven't been so successful in the last few years.
The proven recruiter thing for sure. And then I think the other takeaway, again, you're starting to see like a path or a plan for Shane Beamer here in terms of how he's building out his staff. Another guy who has been at multiple SEC schools in his past. Blackwell was at A&M last year. He spent a year on Jimbo's staff. Before that, he was at Ole Miss, Coach Keyshawn Judkins, in his, I think, 1,600-yard freshman season in 22. So you're seeing a guy who's been all over the SEC and all over that footprint from recruiting, and also just knows what it takes to coach in this league. I think that's been a clear kind of track for Shane Beamer when you look at his assistant hires in the past, even going back to Jody Wright, who's gone now at Murray State, but he was an SEC guy when they hired him. Dowell Loggins, obviously, then in Arkansas. I think that's a very clear focus for Beamer, and you're seeing it with everything he's trying to build with the staff.
Yeah, and when you look at Blackwell's recruiting record at Ole Miss, some of his most successful recruits were he pulled a couple 4-stars out of Florida and Texas, which obviously are recruit hotbeds, and I think most SEC schools now that Texas and Oklahoma are joining the conference are trying to expand a little bit west and see if they can't make a little bit of an impact in those regions now that you can say, hey, you'll get to play, in your home crowd once or twice while you're here. So, yeah, I think savvy ad and between Coley and Blackwell, I'm really excited to see how that has an impact on recruiting and also on the immediate field, because he's obviously got some Blackwell in particular obviously has some really great specimens to work with this coming year. The only other, I guess, note that I don't think that we mentioned on the podcast was that by all indications, Justin Stepp is over, because when we talked about Coley coming in, we were like, is he going to coach tight ends? Coley's going to coach wide receivers, and then Stepp for now is moving over to tight end. I think, yeah, I mean, we may find out a little bit more into this BOT meeting, but probably not.
Shane Beamer does talk today at, I think, 4:00. So maybe we'll have some more on that.
Yeah. And speaking of, I guess, Beamer and the newcomers, tomorrow's men's basketball game. Oh, sorry. Next Saturday's men's basketball game against Missouri at home. There'll be like a halftime recognition of the newcomers. And
it's going to take up like half the court. You have that many portals and freshmen.
Yeah. So let me look at where it actually has landed right now, but South Carolina added 20 total in the portal this year, at least so far, and they're definitely in the top 10 in the Rivals team rankings. Let me see if I can get that number. While I'm pulling that up, the only other recruiting note I have for you right now is the junior days, the next 2 weekends. I will have the full visitors list on those in the weekly recruiting wrap-up, which should be posted later today or first thing tomorrow on GamecockScoop.com. But I guess the highlight for this weekend is South Carolina's top quarterback prospect in the 2025 class is Ryan Montgomery out of Findlay, Ohio. We've talked about him several times on the podcast already, but he is expected in town. I know that Beamer and Loggins went to visit him at his school, watched him play some basketball last weekend as well. The team portal rankings, now that I have them pulled up, South Carolina is currently at 7 in the Rivals team portal rankings with 20 total commits and a 2.75 star average. That could fluctuate a little bit. Some of the more unknowns. Don't have the full ranking breakdown now. It looks like about 16 of the 20 have a full ranking right now, but good company. I mean, you look at who's ahead of them. You got AM, Colorado, Ole Miss. I mean, the who's who of who has done pretty well in the portal up to this point, though. Can't complain about the haul this year, I don't think.
No, I think we've talked about it extensively over the last month and a half, but you supplemented your roster, you got the needs in, and now I think it just becomes about what can you actually do in an off season, in a spring ball over a summer, and actually try to turn this around like in a football sense. Everybody portals. I think that's kind of reality. I mean, you're not the only team who's going to look at their portal class and feel pretty good about it, especially not in the SEC. So now that just kind of becomes that next step about what you can actually do with it.
Well, and I think to see if this is an actual strategy going forward, because we talked about how they kind of shifted their 2024 strategy from an NIL and, whatever promises you can or cannot make perspective to not over promise incoming 2024 freshmen that were kind of on that borderline, but maybe save some of that for the portal. It seems like it worked, at least in terms of numbers and some of the names that we've mentioned throughout the past few weeks. Now let's see if it works on the field.
I think that's pretty much a bet where you got to leave it right now on January 19th. Like I said, we'll hear from Shane Beamer a little bit later today for the first time, I think, since signing day, about the 2 new assistant hires, and I'm sure some other stuff we mentioned too. Keep it on Gamecock Scoop for that. Yeah,
we'll have live updates on that, and then anything relevant in the aftermath. Let's kind of switch gears here to basketball. So since we last talked, we kind of were breaking down the stretch for the men's team and how difficult it was, but maybe you pull off a road win between either Alabama or Mizzou, and then you have some opportunities at home, like against Georgia, blah, blah, blah. Well, we kind of know how some of that has played out. You had your worst loss of the season at Alabama. But I think we talked a little bit about that last week.
Yeah.
You kind of shake that off. You're like, yeah, you kind of shake that off. Like, okay, obviously went cold, bad showing, but still some opportunities ahead of you. And then you took advantage of one of those opportunities against Missouri. At Missouri, that's a tough place to win. You pull off a last-second game winner from Kobe Wright in overtime. Really solid game. And then you have a huge opportunity at home against Georgia this past week on, what was that, Tuesday night, and really just can't get over the hill. I mean, you have every opportunity in the world. You shoot, like 50% from three-throw line, if that?
It was something like that. I think it was like 16 for 32 or 17 for 32. It was way too many missed free throws to win a home game against a decent enough conference opponent.
Right. And the final margin is 74-69, I believe. Yeah. So 5 points. If you do just a little better in free throw percentage, shoot, 70%, which when you look at their season average, they were up near 80. Just a completely off night there. Went through some more cold stretches that seemed a little reminiscent of that Alabama game. Of course, Georgia didn't quite have the same amount of firepower on the other side. And really that felt like a loss that at the season, when you're on bubble watch and you're looking back, that one might hurt a little bit.
Yeah, there's no way around it. Lamont said they didn't play well enough to win, and I would agree with that in general, but also you were up 9 with, I think, 11 minutes to go, 10 minutes to go, something like that. And you mentioned the free throws. I can't shake. Josh Gray missed 5 in a row in about a minute and a half in the middle of that half, and he played pretty well before that. He hit 2 big free throws against Missouri as well in that overtime win down the stretch, but that just sinks the game and got Georgia back in it. And I think we haven't even mentioned it yet, but Miles Studi got hurt on Tuesday. That's the biggest thing. Did you see it live? Like, it was the other end of the court where the media is at CLA. I saw him go down and he was holding his shoulder. And I think it was RJ Melendez for Georgia got hit with a flagrant foul on that play. Did you actually get a good look at what happened there?
Yeah, they showed a few replays, and the reason it was called a flagrant was it was like an arm hook. So it was coming
Okay.
out of a free throw, and they went to tie up to kind of like try to box each other out, and Studi's arm got kind of caught uh, in the hook of Melendez's arm, and then Melendez just kind of like rolled it over. I don't think it was overly intentional, but the result was I don't know what did they give an official thing or did they just say shoulder injury? To me, it looked like he might have dislocated it.
They
It definitely didn't
said
look like it felt very good.
no, he was in a lot of pain. Obviously, he didn't return to the game. Could have used another shooter down the stretch in a close game there. They said left shoulder strain out 2 to 3 weeks, which actually isn't as bad as it looked originally. But then you look at the schedule and you see, all right, you're going to Arkansas tomorrow. Kentucky comes Tuesday. Then it's the Mizzou rematch. Then you go to Tennessee. Then you go to Georgia in the next few weeks. And it's like, that's probably the worst time possible you could have lost a starter for 2 weeks, 3 weeks.
Yeah, we did talk about how the schedule softens up a little bit late, and maybe he'll be back for that, and then you can string together some wins to make the late push. But this next, like 4 or 5 games seems like 1 and 4 could be on the table, sort of thing.
Yeah.
And of course that would kill a lot of the momentum that you had heading into the conference schedule, and that you felt after a 2-1 start that we could, as soon as tomorrow, start to feel like the wheels are coming off. On the flip, I don't think that Arkansas is an unbeatable opponent.
No, I don't either.
If you can get your 3-point shooting back underneath you, which is something that they've struggled with a bit since conference play started, they excelled at through non-conference play.
Yeah, if you're a subscriber, I wrote about that after the game Tuesday. Some numbers in there on that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think you could also come 3-2 out of this, right? If everything goes perfectly, but obviously not having that extra weapon of Studi, was usually good for 2 or 3 3-pointers a game or around that. Definitely hurts, and you're gonna have some guys step up. Speaking of guys stepping up, I do feel like we've seen the emergence more and more of Colin Murray Boyles,
Yes.
who had a really nice game in that loss against Georgia. I believe he had the first 5 or 7 points at the half for South Carolina. Was making an impact on both ends of the floor, had a few blocks, had some steals. I've talked before about how quick his hands are. I really think that he's starting to emerge as someone that they're going to be able to count on down the stretch, and that's a hit, right? That was a 3-star. I think by the end he was rated a 4-star by the time the final ranking for that class came together. But that's someone Paris and company kind of identified early was a hidden gem, I suppose.
Yeah, I think the other thing too, when you watch Colin Murray Boyles, is just the lack of fear. Maybe he's a freshman, he doesn't know any better, whatever. But Georgia, Russell Tachua, I think that's how you say his name, 7-footer. He's one of the better big men in the SEC. He was killing South Carolina for most of that first half. Murray Boyles backed him down a couple times, got a couple buckets on him. I remember one trip he just straight up posted him up and drew a foul early in the second half. Yeah, he's not afraid of anybody.
He did the same against Georgia's 6'10" guy as well. And keep in mind, Murray Boyles is like 6'7" which is obviously still pretty good size, but compared to a 7-footer, I mean, he had 5 inches on him. So no, I was really impressed with that too. Also, how do you say Tachua?
Tachua, I think.
Chiwa. He's not just 7 foot, but he's like a beast. He's like 6 foot, 300 all muscle or something. It's an impressive looking guy. So anyway, looking forward with men's basketball. I think if you can win 2 of the next 5, go 2 and 3 in the next 5.
Yeah, that'll get you to the halfway point of SEC play in the next 5.
Yeah,
and you have 4 and 5 at the turn.
Obviously, tough game against Tennessee and Kentucky in that stretch, which you would probably pencil down as losses. But I do think you could win 2, 3 when we're talking Arkansas, Missouri, and Georgia. So if you can do that, then I think you do set up a stretch run at the end where you're still in pretty good position. Hopefully, you have no more injuries. You get Studi back, and things get interesting from there.
I think that's kind of the way you got to look at it. Like I said, those next 5 games take you to the halfway point of SEC play. That's at Arkansas versus Kentucky versus Mizzou, at Tennessee, at Georgia. Go 2-3, get to 4-5 at the halfway point, and you still feel like you're in with a chance.
Yeah, and to me, I guess the losses in this stretch, I don't know. Are you hitting the panic button yet? I guess is my question. Because to me, not. It was always going to be tough to maintain the sort of streaky shooting that carried them through a lot of the non-con, that carried them against Mississippi State. And now that it's kind of settled into something, I think different. I guess they're having to find other ways to kind of manufacture scoring. It's kind of worked out for them. If they hit their free throws the other night, I think they come out of the stretch, 2-1. Obviously, a really, really, really poor game offensively against Alabama, but you feel kind of okay about how Mizzou and Georgia went. And then if you can somehow turn on, I guess, some of that streaky 3-point shooting that was working before, then I still think you can compete with anyone. I mean, do you think that that's an unreasonable thing to ask, that they do turn that back on? Or I don't know. Like, it's style now,
I go both ways on it. Like, I think they're at 26% in SEC play. I don't think they're that bad, but I also think losing Stute hurts. That's one of your better shooters. He was one of the ones who still was shooting in league play. Like, that's going to give you a hit, or it's going to make you take a hit. I don't know. I'm not ready to say the wheels are falling off, but I could see a way they will quickly, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I think that's fair. We're going to learn a lot about the resilience and mental fortitude of this team. We did see in that Georgia game down the stretch a couple of big-time mental errors as we were getting to like the climactic point of that game. Now, I do think the refereeing blame to take there, some weird calls, but at the end of the day, whatever, they win against you, and just some kind of bad fouls down the stretch that turned what should have been, I guess, a potential buzzer beater of the game into one that didn't really have a shot in the last minute. Yeah,
that's pretty much about where you leave it. Women's only played once since we talked. They beat one of the worst teams in the SEC by 62. Not a whole lot to say about that game. Ashton Watkins dunked.
Make it. They didn't make it to 100. They only made it to 98. So, yeah, the Ashton Watkins dunk. Again. If you haven't checked that out, go find that on Twitter or YouTube or whatever. It's pretty impressive and made the Sports Center top 10. Everything right at. Sorry, what were you going to say?
No, I think they might have. We'll see. Maybe turned a corner a little bit. We talked a little bit about some of maybe a bit of a lull they hit early in SEC play. Looking a little bit sharper on both ends. Defense looks a little more connected. I think you're seeing a little more from like Tessa Johnson's playing really well as a true freshman. Her minutes have gone up pretty much every game in conference play. Obviously, Ashton Watkins, we mentioned the dunk, but she's playing really well at both ends too. You do have A&M Sunday. That's not going to be easy on the road, but I think right now you're looking at Thursday. You're going to Baton Rouge. That's kind of where we're going to see where this team is in 6 days.
Yeah, I actually think that A&M is a nice ramp up to that. They're significantly better than the Kentucky team you just celebrated. It's a road matchup in a decent environment. So I think that'll be a good test of how some of that turning the corner that you described it as translates. And then, big one come up after that, or we're hoping that you're going to be able to make it down in person for that, right?
That is the plan right now. If anybody's got any Baton Rouge Rex, I don't know. Hit me up. You know where to find me.
My Baton Rouge rec is keep going to New Orleans. That's my. That's not fair to Baton Rouge. I haven't really ever been to Baton Rouge, but New Orleans is very cool.
Yeah, it was weird. It's like I think football hasn't played there since like 2009 or something.
Yeah, that was
it's been
tough.
Since then. But or like no, LSU hasn't been to Willie B since 2009. That's what other way around.
Yeah, because they were supposed to, and then there was a hurricane. Exactly. But yeah, South Carolina went there 2012, and then whatever that hurricane year was, but they went there as scheduled in 2012.
Anyway, big game in Baton Rouge for a South Carolina team, which doesn't happen that much. Top 10 matchup, league standings on the line. College game day is going to be there. It's their first road show of the year for, I think, men's or women's, but definitely for women's at least, that Thursday night. I think someone told me they're expecting the largest non-football crowd ever for a sporting event at LSU, which we think of how big baseball is there. That's a big deal. It's going to be insane.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. We'll have plenty of coverage in the lead up to that, and obviously everything that happens in between. Tomorrow, I'll be around on Gamecocks.com to talk the South Carolina versus Arkansas basketball game. Alan has, Sunday for Texas A&M. Mm-hmm. And speaking of baseball, any sort of, I guess, off-season notes or anything lately?
Nothing new right now. They're doing their preseason media day with Kingston players, I think Wednesday. And I think they start like their camp next week. So we're ramping up to that in about 3-4 weeks too.
Yes. We're about to get to the point where, March, that is the month where there's like 40 things on the schedule for just the month. It's going to be really fun. I'm looking forward to it. All right. Well, in the meantime, gamecocks.com. Like I said, we'll have live threads for all the live events coming up in the next few days. And I will have a full weekly recruiting wrap up for those of you that are keeping up with the 2025 class, which every time that year ticks up,
I know, right?
Feel a little bit older. And we also have some content this morning on a couple of offers to 2026 kids. So if you want to look even further, we got that too. Anyway, we'll be back next week with the GamecocksScoop.com podcast. Until then, we'll see you.